All right, welcome in. I've got a lot in store for you on the 49ers tonight. We are on the eve of the 53-man roster cut down. So there is going to be major movement tomorrow on perhaps multiple fronts. And then the 49ers return to practice the day after that with their initial version of their team set. But we also have some Brandon Aiyuk and Trent Williams comments from a Hall of Famer, a very respected Hall of Famer, to visit. And they really echo a lot of what we've been talking about on the show. Obviously, anytime that you listen to Steve Young, you gain perspective. But he was on KMBR, and this is what he said about Brandon Aiyuk. Quote, the agent, who is Ryan Williams in this case, has got to be able to figure out a way to bring that player to see the values other than the dollars, to see the context that there's a lot of great players out there that are playing with brutal teams that have no chance to see the full measure of who they can be as a player. And that's not you. End quote. Steve Young speaks from experience. Before he was with the 49ers, where he blossomed into a Hall of Famer and the highest rated passer of all time at his time of his retirement, Steve Young was in a wasteland. He was playing for the creamsicle Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So he knows the difference between a bad organization and a great one. I don't think there's any debate that amongst credible people that the 49ers are a good organization. They've been to at least the NFC Championship game in 4 of the past 5 years. Brandon Aiyuk is in objectively a good spot to showcase his skill set. He put up the most yards per reception last year. His efficiency was through the roof. He's in a good spot to showcase that skill set and also to maximize his chances of winning a championship. There is a simple truth in football, and this is what Steve Young is touching on. This is something I've mentioned so many times. Compromise is going to be necessary for the 49ers and Brandon Aiyuk to reach a deal, especially from Brandon Aiyuk, since he doesn't have the leverage that the 49ers do with him already being under contract for 2024. But the simple truth is that good teams have less to spend than bad teams. So it's a hard-capped league. A team with a lot of good players is probably having to pay those players at the market rate of good players, which means that they're closer to the limits of the salary cap than a bad team, which doesn't have as many good players, so is not having to pay such money. In general, that is the truth. I think the 49ers match up with the general truth. They've handed out more big contracts than any other team in the NFL since Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch took over in 2017. So since that is the case, since they had to give a really big one to Nick Bosa last year, since now Brock Purdy is going to be deserving of a really big one next year, they have a certain budget for Brandon Aiyuk. That budget naturally is not as big as the budget of the New England Patriots, an objectively bad team, or the Pittsburgh Steelers, an objectively mediocre team. Other teams, it's not rocket science. They'd be willing and able to spend more money for somebody like Brandon Aiyuk. But that's where the age-old conundrum comes from, right? Does a player stay with the really good team and the really good environment for a relative discount, or does he want to go elsewhere for more money? The 49ers obviously ultimately hold the cards, at least for 2024 here, because Aiyuk is already under contract, but they also want to make sure that they reach an expedited resolution in this situation. They also want to make sure that they keep their locker room intact, that they keep themselves focused on their 2024 goal. So it's their duty to examine all options if Brandon Aiyuk is not seeing this situation from their perspective or from Steve Young's perspective. But Steve Young's perspective, I think, is the prevailing intelligent thought here. And it's something that has to happen if a compromise is going to be reached in this situation. The agent has got to be able to figure out a way to bring that player to see values other than the dollars. Aiyuk was never going to sign with the 49ers for as much money as a team like the New England Patriots could have offered him. This wasn't fundamentally was one of the pillars that we were dealing with, right? One of the general truths that were backbone to this whole discussion. There's going to be a slight discount at least a slight discount to stay with the 49ers on a long-term deal that was awarded to Brandon Aiyuk early. Remember, he's still under contract for next season. So Steve Young was sparing no punches with his words on KMBR. I mean, this is a guy in Steve Young who, A, has the experience of playing for a bad organization before. That was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then his career blossomed under Bill Walsh with the 49ers. But B, Steve Young also saw the sacrifice that the 49ers had to make. And a lot of it was futile, unfortunately, for them in the late 1990s before the team didn't have any room under the salary cap and they had to blow everything up. That was after Steve Young's final concussion against the Arizona Cardinals after Aeneas Williams hit him. But I think Steve Young, his career gives him the ability to view these kind of things with perspective. You talk about championship windows and you talk about the ability to just kick down the door and grab a Lombardi trophy. The 49ers were able to make that happen in 1994. Steve Young was the MVP, both of the league and of the Super Bowl, where he threw those 6 touchdown passes. So he gets the dynamics. He understands. I mean, he saw somebody like Jesse Sapolo change positions in front of him ahead of that 94 season. I believe ahead of free agency for Jesse Sapolo, because Bart Oates came over from the New York Giants to play center for the 49ers, moving Sapolo to guard. So that was a switch that Sapolo had to make on the fly, but he made it for the team. There are situations where Steve Young understands that you've got to compromise a little bit to be part of a winning culture. And here's the thing, and this is something that I'm sure the 49ers are trying to reiterate to Brandon Aiyuk, and maybe it hasn't come through yet. I don't know where this is at as far as what Brandon Aiyuk and Ryan Williams are thinking. But I think from a value standpoint for Brandon Aiyuk, a cheaper deal with the 49ers could actually be worth more to him in the long run than a more expensive deal with a bad team. Because it's not just about your earning ability on contract number 2. There's also earning ability on contract number 3. And to earn on contract number 3, what is Aiyuk right now? 26 years old. You're probably going to be around 30. You'll be technically past your athletic prime by the time that contract number 3 rolls around. So what that means is that you better have a lot of production and a lot of efficiency under your belt on contract 2, and you better have regulated mileage on your body by the time that contract 3 comes up for negotiation. And if you are the single featured guy elsewhere, that's going to, and you have a bad quarterback, it's going to lead you to a lot of overuse, and it's going to lead you to more bruises than if you're in a setup that's as good as the 49ers setup right now, where Brandon Aiyuk is not getting the target share that he would with another team, but he's definitely getting the efficiency share. And I think he's definitely preserving his body, not only by the usage numbers, but also by the fact that Brock Purdy's putting the football where it should be. He's hitting Brandon Aiyuk in stride. He's not throwing hospital balls over the middle of the field to Brandon Aiyuk. There is tremendous value in that, in a good quarterback, a good play caller, a good offensive system, a good team, and a good locker room. And I think that's where Steve Young is coming from. And it's a trade-off. If you want to have all that for a longer period of time, just past your rookie deal, you're probably not going to have the same size of base salary. Might be a couple $1 million less. But since good teams have less to spend than bad teams, that's the trade-off that players typically have to make. But if you're thinking about that third contract, if you can better position yourself with your performance and with the preservation of your body over the life of your second contract, then your third can be exponentially bigger than it would have otherwise been. So in the long run, you're making more money, actually, when it comes to what's hitting your bank account if you play your cards right. Now, obviously, that's impossible to firmly project right now, but you're playing odds. You're playing chances. And I think that throughout the course of NFL history, we've seen more players regret trying to go to where there's more money, even if it's a worse team, than regret taking a discount for a better situation. And I think that's what's coming from Steve Young. Now, he also didn't really mince words when it came to the Trent Williams situation, also speaking on KMBR. This is what Steve said. Thanks to KMBR's Twitter. We have the graphic up here. You can go check them out. Like, quote, like, bro, if you want to tear up that contract and do something, well, sorry, this is Brandon Aiyuk first. Why don't we finish the Aiyuk talk and then talk about Trent Williams after? Because Steve Young had one more thought on Brandon Aiyuk. Quote, like, bro, if you want to tear up the contract and do something big, then you might want to go to the 5th year and prove it out. Or if you're going to ask to be traded, then when the 49ers make a trade that works for them, you got to say you're up for it. End quote. So Steve Young essentially calling out Brandon Aiyuk for trying to have his cake and eat it too, treating this like a free agency when it's not. So the 49ers and Aiyuk have obviously been in communication here through the offseason. Recap for anybody who's been living under a rock. They couldn't come to terms. Brandon Aiyuk wanted more money. Then he requested a trade when the 49ers wouldn't meet him there. So the 49ers said, okay, fine, we'll set up trades elsewhere. If it's too bad that you don't want the to accept the discount to stay in this really good locker room on this really good team. But if that's your preference, we'll trade you. Here are the Patriots. Here are the Cleveland Browns. They gave them 2 options. They agreed in principle on 2 trades, including with the Browns. It was a blockbuster deal. Amari Cooper would have come to the 49ers. A 2nd-round pick would have come to the 49ers. And a 5th-round pick would have come to the 49ers. So they had a fork in the road. And the 49ers picked one of the options that Brandon Aiyuk and his camp said would be acceptable to them. They said, okay, fine, pay me or trade me. So they said, okay, fine, here's the trade. And then Brandon Aiyuk vetoed it. He said, no, I don't want to go to Cleveland. And, he's not a free agent, right? He's not entering the unknown right now. He's under contract for 2024. So it doesn't work the way of Brandon Aiyuk choosing where he wants to go unless the 49ers give up that power, give up that leverage. And obviously they don't want to do that. There's no reason for them to do that. It would be terrible precedent. But it seems that Aiyuk and his camp, to a certain extent, tried to do that. And that's, what Steve Young is alluding to through his comment right here. If you're going to ask to be traded, that's when the 49ers make a trade that works for them. You have to say that you're up for it. You can't just say, okay, no, fine, I don't want to be traded. It sounds, a lot of this seems that it's Brandon Aiyuk been trying to have his cake and eat it too. He's trying to get the big money that typically only bad teams are able to pay, but he's trying to get it from the good team, the 49ers, and it just does not work that way. Good teams have less to spend than bad teams. That's just how it is. So what's going to happen next? Well, deadline pressure should be ratcheting it up. Brandon Aiyuk is still under contract with the 49ers. He will pay dearly if he isn't around week 1 or week 2. He's going to lose, $750,000 or so? I think it's $734 per week of game checks. This is the biggest salary that Brandon Aiyuk is scheduled to command. So obviously the 49ers have that nuclear option of doing nothing. Ball in their court. Reports have indicated that they've tried to move closer to Brandon Aiyuk's demands, but obviously not to the satisfaction of Brandon Aiyuk and his camp. That's all that we know. All that we know is that they haven't reached agreement and that the situation remains unpredictable. And we now also know that guys like Steve Young are chiming in on the situation. Steve Young, the 49ers Hall of Famer, is showing some impatience as well. And Aiyuk isn't the only contract negotiation that is yet to be resolved for the 49ers. The other one is Trent Williams, and this comes from, I believe, NBC Sports Bay Area. They quoted what Trent Williams said on KMBR. They quoted what Steve Young said about Trent Williams on KMBR, and I'll read it here. The Super Bowl window never closes, and it's not going to close on us, Steve Young said, but it will narrow. It will narrow significantly next year. So if the window's as open as it's going to be for some time right now, everybody needs to be on board. And that's why Trent, I think he set the market with his original contract. And I think that Jed York, and everybody's willing to do that because it's the best tackle in the league. And now you're going to come back and say, no, I want to set it again because there's another $8 million collectively that I could go get. And I'm on my last contract. I'm getting old. It's like, bro, do you not see what we're trying to get done here? End quote. That's all from Steve Young. The highlight at the end should be on, it's like, bro, do you not see what we're trying to get done here? Steve Young comes from the era, when the 49ers won that last Super Bowl in the mid 90s, where the team did the limbo to get under one of the initial salary caps. They were literally pulling guys off the practice field to renegotiate their contracts so they could fit under the salary cap. The guys would be in full cleats and uniform walking into Carmen Policy's office in that 1994 season as the 49ers were renegotiating these things. And there were guys that took pay cuts. There were guys that restructured their deals. It was the first type of conversion to signing bonus restructures that we talk about a lot, that I'm sure we're going to see once Trent Williams' deal is finally done. We'll see that kind of mechanism. We saw it with Christian McCaffrey. But regardless, the 49ers made it work. They did the limbo. They got under the salary cap. They dominated the league. Then they got over the hump. They beat the Dallas Cowboys, and the rest was history. That's the background that Steve Young comes from. That's when he was a player. And he sees some parallels, I guarantee you. He sees some parallels between what the 49ers have now and what they had back in the mid-1990s. And what they had in the mid-90s was a team that was tortured by the Dallas Cowboys. They lost in 2 straight NFC championship games. And then they got over the hump by adding a little bit more, by getting really fired up in that 94 season, adding a couple guys that could fight. I mean, literally, Ken Norton Jr. came over to the 49ers from the Dallas Cowboys. They later signed Deion Sanders as well, but Norton and Gary Plummer and William Floyd, all those guys were fighting at practice. Those were different days when it came to fighting at practice. But they got some tough guys. They got some really good players. They pushed themselves over the hump. These 49ers have lost 2 Super Bowls over the past 5 years to the same team, to the Kansas City Chiefs. There's been heartache in the NFC Championship game sandwiched in between those losses to the Rams and then to the Philadelphia Eagles in the game that Brock Purdy got hurt. And now the 49ers are desperate to kick down the door, just like Steve Young's 49ers of 30 years ago. So Steve Young is viewing this as, well, these guys have to realize the moment that they're in. I mean, it took every ounce of the 49ers' energy to climb Everest and finally vanquish the Cowboys in that 1994 season. It's probably going to take a heck of a lot to do the same and get over the hump of the Chiefs. And right now, the 49ers are down 2 key pieces that they've had in previous runs trying to get to the Super Bowl, and that is Trent Williams and Brandon Aiyuk. So you can sense the impatience from Steve Young on KMBR today, and I just thought that it was really, really interesting context. I think that this right here, good teams have less to spend than bad teams, is one of the fundamental rules of NFL football that people should always keep in mind. Today's update, why don't we play some Ricky Pearsall video from practice? This is some video that I prepared for everybody. Ricky back in the blue non-contact jersey with a little sleeve on his left shoulder. That's the shoulder that he's been having some trouble with, the sublex shoulder, which means a partial dislocation. I mean, I went off a little bit yesterday on this whole Ricky Pearsall discourse. Quite frankly, it is ridiculous. Brandon Aiyuk came out of ASU as well in that 2020 season. He also missed the first game, and it was nowhere this stupid, the discourse surrounding Brandon Aiyuk. And now Ricky Pearsall shows up. He's hurt during training camp, and people are ready to write him off. I don't think that people realize how much injury mitigation occurs in the National Football League with literally every single player. Yes, you heard me right. Every single player. There's got to be injury mitigation with every single player in the NFL. This is a gladiatorial contact sport. Guys get hurt, and they get hurt frequently in the NFL. Everybody's dealt with at least bruises, and guys have played through stuff, and it's very clear that Ricky Pearsall was one of the players who played through stuff. The ultimate judge for a team when it's looking at a player's medical history and how it's going to be able to work with him moving forward is his past playing history. If he's been able to see the field and be productive at prior levels of football or with prior teams, and Leonard Floyd is a great example of this, then a team can reasonably conclude that it's probable that that player is going to stay productive and available for them moving forward. Leonard Floyd told us this back after the 49ers signed him in March. He said, he has got a 108 game streak going on, right? He hasn't missed a game in over 6 years. And he said, I've been hurt over that time. It's not like I haven't been hurt. It's impossible to go through an NFL career, not get hurt. It's probably even impossible to go through a season and not get hurt. I mean, these are minor car accidents that are sometimes big car accidents that are happening when players collide on the field. But he said that even though I have constantly really been hurt, I've been able to fight through it. I've been able to figure ways out to keep myself available. Well, what did Ricky Pearsall do in college? He was dealing with the shoulder. He was dealing with some other injuries. He was able to fight to keep himself involved in both ASU's offense and then Florida's offense. There's a track record of Ricky Pearsall being available. So now we move over to Ricky Pearsall's NFL career. Obviously, the shoulders flared up. We get it. Obviously, the 49ers knew that that was on his record because this happened to him as a junior in college a couple years ago. We get that too. But the question for the 49ers is, with some of the best medical staff in the world, can they manage Ricky Pearsall's shoulder history appropriately, just like they manage the medical files of essentially every other player on the team who's dealt with something at some point or the other? Can they manage that appropriately to keep that player available moving over into the future? And their plan for that, and I can only speak the strategy, and that's what we talk about the most on this show is strategy. Their plan for that has been to slow play the rehab from the injury that happened earlier this training camp. Right now, he's in the blue non-contact jersey that you saw in the video, and they hope that he's going to be out of that non-contact jersey soon and that he can make it through his rookie season. He's made it through other seasons before, so why not this one? I think you could talk about surgery, but probably only as a last result for Ricky Pearsall when you're talking about in-season surgery, because it's going to be really hard to come back from that over the course of the actual active season. That might be more of an option for the postseason between his first and second years. But we're not at that point yet, right? We're at the point of asking, okay, can the 49ers slow play treatment plan for Ricky Pearsall, rehab plan, can that be something that allows him to be available consistently for 2024? And if anybody tells you that they know the answer to that, they're lying to you. They don't. There's inherent risk. There's inherent unpredictability toward health in football. The injury list for every single team in the NFL is never empty, just part of the sport. So when somebody says, yeah, it's football, when it comes to injuries, they mean it. That's true. That's part of this sport. Part of it is layering depth, stacking good players on top of good players. And this is my mother-in-law had a good point. I got a shout out to her. The dynamics of this might be different if the 49ers didn't have as much talent in the receiving room ahead of Ricky Pearsall. This is a guy who they keep on saying that they've had to save from himself. You can't, you have to stop him from playing because this guy's going to go out there. He's going to be a machine anyway. We saw him play through a bunch of stuff in college. The 49ers have the luxury of biding their time so that Ricky Pearsall gets fully healthy or closer to full health, because they do have other good receivers on this football team, and they have a really, really good quarterback in Brock Purdy on this football team, and a good play caller in Kyle Shanahan. Obviously, the current absence of Brandon Aiyuk, I think, puts a little bit bigger magnifying glass on Ricky Pearsall, but the cupboard is not bare in San Francisco. Even outside the receiving room, you have other targets like George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, guys that don't make this as pressing of an issue to where you've got to play Ricky Pearsall even though he's hurt. And as my mother-in-law said, if the cupboard were more bare in front of Pearsall, there's probably a really, really good chance that he would have been out of the non-contact jersey already and that he wouldn't have missed some of the practice before now, because the 49ers would be in a more desperate situation. But they've actually created a situation where they're not desperate, where they can stand on some high ground, for example, in the Brandon Aiyuk contract negotiations. They don't have to cave to the player. They also don't have to rush somebody like Ricky Pearsall. So that's the strategy behind this situation. Today at practice, I wrote about Darrell Luter Jr. I'm going to send this over to Mike. That's the article that's up on the screen. You probably heard me talking about this interesting subplot to the 49ers Raiders game over the course of shows over the past couple days. Sending it to Mike. You can go ahead, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and go into the description and read about Darrell Luter Jr. But he went to South Alabama, where Carter Bradley, the Raiders quarterback, went to school, and they overlapped in 2022. So, and I asked Luter about it today. Great stuff. He didn't realize that his former college teammate was in the game until he literally looked up as the Raiders offense broke the huddle, and he saw Carter Bradley. He looked at the quarterback, and he's like, oh my God, that's my former college quarterback. And then he proceeded to intercept him. As you can see in that picture there, that's a 6'3" receiver, by the way, that Darrell Luter Jr. is working against. So this, and you could see the headline of the article that you could check out, but 49ers Darrell Luter Jr. could be a bridge to the team's future at cornerback. And I'm going to open up the roster here in a couple minutes, and we're going to look at the next 49ers 53-man roster projection, and we're going to go through a ton of stuff. But Darrell Luter Jr. is really interesting because he's literally a bridge player. He's a guy that's going to make the 53, but he's obviously not going to start, at least to begin this season, because they're loaded with veterans in front of him. But he is a guy who should have a golden opportunity to start, even on a healthy roster, come 2025. So the preseason was especially important for somebody like Darrell Luter Jr. to establish himself and get those cornerback reps in. And one thing that the 49ers love about him is his arm length, 32 3/8 inches. So, we talk about wingspan here. I got a pretty long wingspan, but I'm not an NFL corner. He's got a really, really long wingspan. And that wingspan helps him cover taller receivers. Ran a lot of press man coverage in college at South Alabama. And when we look at the 49ers depth chart, we'll see exactly where he might be able to fit in for this team moving forward, not just in 2024, but also in 2025 and beyond. Now, a lot of people give Luter trouble because he wasn't looking, and I don't really think it was his fault. He refused to talk about whose fault it was in the Super Bowl today, which I thought was a classy move. I mean, there's different theories. You could have said that Ray McLeod should have done a better job waving him off, but the ball hit off of his leg, right? And it was one of the most critical gaffes in the Super Bowl for the 49ers, because a play later, after Ray McLeod was unable to overcome the fumble, a play later, the Chiefs scored a touchdown and the comeback was on. Extremely, extremely painful stuff, but I thought that Darrell Luter Jr. had a really, really mature answer about how he deals with it. I'm going to read to you a little bit from the article here. Luter said the gaffe was a hard pill to swallow. He rewatched the play multiple times, trying to assess what he could have done differently. Luter declined to go into further specifics about the play, but he did talk about how he's put it in the rearview mirror as this opportunity of 2024 beckons. Quote, "One person that I know for sure helped me out is God. I always pray to him about it," Luter said. 2, my wife. I always talk to her about things. Whatever is going on in my head, I talk to her about it. She calms me down, gives me peace. Question mark. Gives me peace. Quotation mark. That was not a question from Darrell Luter Jr. The one thing that the 49ers talked about when they drafted Luter was his maturity. I think it's really shining through right there. That guy that said that quote right there that I just read is 24 years old. He's married. He's 24 years old. He's talking about, his faith. He's talking about how his wife brings him peace when he talks about some of these things. I think that's tremendously, tremendously impressive stuff. And that's what John Lynch and the 49ers were talking about when they first drafted Darrell Luter Jr. So when we transition this to talk about the 49ers 53-man roster cut down, we look at the players who won't necessarily be starters this year, but we look at personalities and we look at how reliable these guys can potentially be in the long term. And we could say, yeah, Darrell Luter Jr. seems like somebody who could be a foundational piece for the 49ers years into the future. Here's what their cornerback depth chart looks like. Charvarius Ward, only under contract through 2024. Isaac Yiadom, only under contract through 2024. Deommodore Lenoir, only under contract through 2024. Rock Ya-Sin, only under contract through 2024. So 4 guys who are at the top of the cornerback depth chart are essentially on one-year deals entering this 2024 season. That's why they drafted Renardo Green, second round pick who's working in with the ones while Isaac Yadam is out. Yadam looks really close to returning. He was already in full uniform and pads today, although he worked off on the side and didn't practice. So Renardo Green, obviously waiting in the wings for the 49ers. The next guy waiting in the wings, since it appears they're going to need more than one of them with all these guys on expiring contracts, is Darrell Luter Jr. And with the type of maturity that we saw in that answer, the way that he's processing that gaffe in the Super Bowl that I don't even think was his fault, with the type of maturity that the 49ers saw even before that when they drafted him out of South Alabama, you can see why this is an exciting player to look at, but not necessarily for a prominent role in 2024. But you have to look at this in terms of the 49ers long-term build, and I think that Luter fits into that. Now, I included this spider chart in the article about Darrell Luter Jr. This is his physical profile. As you can see, the height is good. It's above average, 61st percentile. It's 6 feet tall for Darrell Luter Jr. But the long arms, 81st percentile. The hand size, 98th percentile. That's really important for cornerbacks. If you got bigger hands, you'll have a better chance of knocking balls away into really tight windows in the NFL. And then the vertical jump, also really good at 91st percentile. So he was going against a very, very tall receiver. That's a 6'3" receiver that he's facing with the Raiders, and he was able to win on the fade pass from his former college quarterback, Carter Bradley. Really cool story. Go ahead and check out the link in the description. So I think it's time to go to that final 53-man projection, don't you guys think? I'm going to open it up here on the screen. Make it a little bit bigger up on the screen. May have to zoom out a little bit just so we have the full view of everything going on. But here we go. So today there was some news about the quarterback room. The NFLPA actually rejected the rules change that said that the emergency third quarterback can come from the practice squad. NFLPA said no, they nixed it. That means that if you want an emergency third, he's got to come from the 53-man roster. So it's even more likely now that the 49ers carry 3 quarterbacks on the 53. That'd be Brock Purdy, Josh Dobbs, and Brandon Allen. Now, I don't know if I have that order right. Maybe it's Brandon Allen at 2 and Dobbs at 3, but this point doesn't really matter. At this point, it just matters who they carry on the 53-man roster. I've got to turn the fan on in this room. It is a little warm. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm back. Fan is on. Camera's about to come on again. So there you go. The 49ers are in a situation where I think that they want to stockpile quarterbacks. Malik Willis is out of Tennessee, and the Titans only have 2 quarterbacks. And I talked about this a lot. Brian Callahan has been the offensive coordinator for Brandon Allen in the past, and I think that he'd be really interested in adding Brandon Allen to the football team, but at what cost, right? And it would, like, 3 things would have to be satisfied for a trade to happen. First, the Titans would have to be willing to give up draft capital to the 49ers. And 2, the 49ers would also have to be okay with vacating one of their top 3 quarterback spots and allowing Tanner Mordecai to slide into that spot, which, I don't know at this point if they're willing to do that, but that's the only potentially intriguing dynamic that I see regarding Brandon Allen. And maybe somebody swoops in and wants Josh Dobbs, but I think in all likelihood, you're looking at these 3 top quarterbacks staying on the 49ers 53-man roster. Running back position, they've already cut a couple guys. They cut Keyshawn Vaughn. They cut Matt Breida. We did not expect either of those 2 guys to make the team. Maybe a little bit of a service the 49ers did to Matt Breida to see if he could catch on somewhere else by cutting him before 1,100 other players are cut from around the league tomorrow. Some teams have actually already finished their roster cuts. 49ers usually wait till a little bit later. My big question is, who's going to be the practice squad guy? Because I think it's clear that McCaffrey, Mitchell, Mason, and Garendo are going to be your 53-man guys. Is it going to be both Cody Schrader and Patrick Taylor Jr. on the practice squad? But very potentially, because they cut it. I think they would have cut every running back that they're not trying to keep in the building today if they're not trying to keep both Cody Schrader and Patrick Taylor Jr. So I'm guessing that both Schrader and Taylor end up on the practice squad. We'll see if they like Mordecai enough to keep him on the practice squad at the quarterback position. Then we can move on to receiver. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky. If Brandon Aiyuk's contract situation isn't worked out yet, he's right now he's taken part of the 90-man roster. Trent Williams is on the reserve list because he didn't report, but Brandon Aiyuk did. But you're going to have to find a way to fit these guys on the initial 53-man roster, which is inherently problematic. That was inherently problematic as well. I X'd out of the screen. I'm sorry. I'm making sure my mic is still working, and I have to go back up and I have to share the screen again. So I was talking about the inherent problems that come with guys that are either holding in or holding out because they're taking up roster spots even though they aren't contributing. I think in an ideal world at receiver, these are the 6 that the 49ers take. Aiyuk, Samuel, Jennings, Conley, Pearsall, Cowing. I've been clear in my thoughts about this. I think that Cowing is your punt returner. I think Conley's your best gunner. You're efficient if you're 6 on the 53 can take care of special teams. Then you talk about, okay, who do you want on the practice squad out of the guys on this side of the dividing line? Well, Ronnie Bell just came off of a really good practice today. He caught 7 passes. So is Ronnie Bell somebody that makes that practice squad? I think if they can pass him through, they like guys who are tenacious like that. He's been fighting to make this football team. I've heard a lot more from Ronnie Bell than I have from Danny Gray. Danny Gray may have more straight line speed, but I think that Ronnie Bell might have a little bit more moxie that the 49ers like. It's hard for me to see Tay Martin sticking around unless guys that the 49ers cut here get poached by other teams. And then Tay, who's been with the practice squad, can fit into what the 49ers are doing. Trent Taylor, I've thought throughout would be a good practice squad ad just because he gives you a higher ceiling of reliability at punt returner. So is Taylor one of the 6 veterans they take? Is Ronnie Bell, if he doesn't make the 53, one of the 6 vets they take? And is Robbie Chosen somebody who has been really interesting as far as his straight line speed? He's won a couple go balls. Is he somebody that you want to keep in the building? Or is Robbie Chosen somebody that you cut? And, you hope that he's still going to be floating around there in case you need him in week 1 or week 2. Those are all decisions that the 49ers have to make over the course of the next several hours if they haven't made them already. They've always carried 4 tight ends. So I think they're going to carry 4 tight ends again. Eric Saubert made a fantastic one-handed catch today. I mean, absolutely sensational with Tracy Walker III in coverage. George Kittle is going to make the team. I'll bet you on it if you don't think that's going to be the case. And I think Braden Willis and Cam Latu make the team as well. I think Latu has actually shown quite a bit of improvement over the course of this training camp. But what do the 49ers do beyond there? I think they want to keep Logan Thomas in the building. So I see Logan Thomas as a practice squad guy. I think that's why they brought him back. I think they gave him the courtesy when they cut him a couple weeks ago of saying, hey, if you think you could find a place that's going to promise you a 53-man roster spot, we won't stop you. But if you're interested in coming back and being part of our practice squad, make sure you re-sign with us before we work on this 53-man roster because we like your trajectory as a blocking tight end. We like the development that we're doing with you. So maybe Logan Thomas is on the practice squad for the 49ers since he's come back into the fold. That would add a guy that had 55 catches last year but is still working on his blocking game and give the 49ers some more developmental runway. Does Mason Pline make it on the practice squad, or is he too raw to justify taking up a 90-man roster spot? And Jake Tonjes, I mean, this is a guy who has been impressive throughout the course of the preseason, has even given the 49ers some backup fullback snaps. He was on the practice squad last year. Can he stay there this year? The problem that you're running into here, if you're the 49ers, is that you only have 16 practice squad spots. And if you do expose a player to waivers or release him, he can sign elsewhere or be claimed by another team. And other teams are going to be really interested in poaching players from the 49ers because the 49ers have the reputation of having a really good roster. So however many guys you can bring back, you will bring back, but there are limits on practice squad size, and you might be constrained by what other teams offer your players to be on their 53-man rosters because the 53-man roster pays a lot more than the practice squad. Moving forward to the offensive line. Boy, this one really stumps me. You would think that they would take one of the two swing tackles they've been working out, Brandon Parker or Chris Hubbard. But if neither of those guys is good enough to make the 53-man, I would recommend the 49ers don't take either of them. I think they view Jalen Moore as better than those guys. I also think that Trent Williams not signing yet could create a domino effect here where the 49ers do have to take either Parker or Hubbard or both. Because if Williams remains on the do not report list or did not report list, and Jalen Moore is technically your starter, well, then you need another swing tackle, not Jalen Moore. And they've been working Parker and Hubbard out at both tackle positions to try to figure out who's most comfortable there. Another question is, Drake Nugent and Jarrett Kingston. When I asked Kyle Shanahan about Nugent and Kingston the other day, he didn't want to answer the question. And I know why he didn't answer the question. Why he didn't? Because he knew that the word could get out that they really like Nugent and Kingston. I personally think it's obvious. I think you just need to watch their game tape, and you see guys who pass protect really well, who've translated the excellent short shuttle times into actual gameplay. And it's going to be hard for the 49ers to port guys like that over to the practice squad if they waive them. So do they take up a spot? And whose spot do they take? Because the 49ers have typically only carried 8 linemen. Of course, if Williams remains on the did not report list, that does open up a spot. Maybe you could sneak Kingston through. He was a 6th-round draft pick, and Nugent was an undrafted free agent. But it's really, really crowded here. I think that offensive line could be a position where the 49ers make a surprise cut. I really do. The problem is that Aaron Banks is currently out at left guard, and Nick Zakelj and Ben Barch, these two guys, have been rotating as his backup. But if somebody like Zakelj is a surprise cut, you lose your frontline backup to Aaron Banks before Aaron Banks returns. So I'm very, very intrigued to see what the 49ers do up front along the offensive line come cut down time. Defensive line, it's unusual that they've only carried 8, but I only have projected them to carry 8. They've got a couple injuries. Leonard Floyd should be back shortly. Yetur Gross-Matos is going to take a little bit longer. But I think that they struggle to find 8 truly worthy defensive linemen for the 53-man roster. Robert Beal is the 8th here in this group that the 49ers have assembled. Has he earned it yet? Well, we'll see. Maybe they've determined that his training camp and his preseason has earned him that spot. I don't think that we've seen enough pressure to breathe easy if you're the 49ers from Robert Beal Jr. in the preseason. So I do think that they're a little bit short on the rotations here, especially at defensive end. And my big question is, how do they fortify that? Do they believe enough in perennial practice squad guy Alex Barrett? Do they like Sam O enough? Jonathan Garvin, a player that has wowed the 49ers enough to bump up into that 53-man rotation? Or are they going to have to go outside the building? Will there be anybody that's available to make the 49ers a little bit better at defensive end? I definitely see a potential hole in the roster at that 4th defensive end spot, just because I haven't seen enough to be convinced by Robert Beal just yet. Then we move to linebacker. Linebacker is another pup position with Dre Greenlaw not going to count against the initial 53-man roster. So in theory, when you compare it to the large picture, at linebacker, you've got one more spot to work with. By the way, I know I like to talk about practice squad. Of course, if the 49ers cut an offensive line, Nugent and Kingston, those are guys that you're going to want back on the practice squad. I have Ben Barch listed twice here, actually. Got to erase his name. That's my mistake. Oops. This is my cut tracker down here. You can go ahead. I'm going to copy and paste this Google Doc link into the chat section, so you should check it out. There you go. You could follow along. So I'm keeping track of the cuts right here. Matt Breida, Keyshawn Vaughn, Presley Harvin III, Lewis Kidd, and John Trey Kirkland, the wide receiver, have all been cut so far. If you want, I could put positions on these guys just so people know. I know that some of you aren't following this as closely as I am, so I shouldn't assume that you are. But they cut a punter today. They waived him, Presley Harvin. Lewis Kidd was an offensive lineman, and John Trey Kirkland was a wide receiver. So they still have about 32 cuts to go. And, you know, guys that don't make the cut, especially young offensive linemen who are performing really well, like Nugent and Kingston, those are the natural segues to the practice squad if the 49ers can get them past waivers. Defensive line, who do you take to the practice squad? Well, I think T.Y. McGill was a nice high floor player on the practice squad last season. Alex Barrett has consistently been on that practice squad. And I do think you keep somebody like Evan Anderson around. Give him a $280,000 guarantee. You think that maybe he can be your next nose tackle type like DJ Jones. He was an undrafted free agent, so there's obviously recognition that he was going to be a project for this team. Remember, it took DJ 3 seasons as a 6th-round pick to really start making hay for the 49ers. Back to the linebacker position, though. D. Winters is hurt right now. That requires an MRI. I'm wondering how they're going to play that with D. Winters at this cut down. Curtis Robinson, to me, if they feel loaded enough at linebacker to where they feel there's a log jam, Curtis Robinson could be a late-round pick swap somewhere else. He's impressed enough in preseason. This is a team that traded Jonas Griffith a couple years ago for a 7th-round pick swap, so they were able to get something out of it, and they also were able to trade Dakota Watson before that. So if Curtis Robinson's services are needed elsewhere around the league, I would definitely look out for that. There's also Jalen Graham in that linebacker room. You know, if they are able to clear a spot here, then you can more easily justify carrying Tatum Bethune, who I think has had a really nice preseason, but is still very much a developmental prospect coming out of the 7th round, just in terms of his hip fluidity and his ability to cover. At corner and safety, I mean, Darrell Luter Jr. is the guy that we just talked about at corner with my article today. Ambry Thomas, they're going to find a machination to get him to injured reserve. There are several different ways the 49ers can do that. Samuel Womack is the real bubble guy for me. It's Womack and Chase Lucas. Does one of those two guys make it? I don't really see the numbers, but it is possible that one of the two do make it. Obviously, practice squad would be a goal for the 49ers if they can't. But these guys right here, it's 6 corners, I think, are definitely making the team, trailed there by Darrell Luter Jr. As far as safety goes, they got to make the decision on Talanoa Hufanga by Wednesday or by tomorrow, really. If they want to keep Hufanga on PUP, he's not going to take a 53-man roster spot, but he would be out for at least 4 weeks. I think that's probably the prudent decision to make, because at this point, if he's not back at practice yet, Talanoa is probably not going to be able to be 100% for week 1, just in terms of getting back up to game speed. And if he's not 100% for week 1, he's probably not going to be 100% for week 2. And even if he's approaching 100% in week 3 or week 4, is it really, really worth it to use a roster spot on somebody that won't be 100% for all of the first 4 weeks? If the answer is no, which I think is the case right now, because the 49ers have got a really good looking player in Malik Mustafa ready for some playing time at safety. If the answer is no, you don't rush Talanoa Hufanga. You let Jair Brown, George Odom, and Malik Mustafa hold down the fort. And maybe you use Tracy Walker III as a practice squad call-up early in the season. If you like Jalen Mahoney out of Vanderbilt enough, you waive him and you bring him back to the practice squad as a developmental project. You know, Taylor Hawkins was the developmental project at safety before this. He was waived with an injury designation recently. So maybe that's Jalen Mahoney's chance for the 49ers now. That's the way that I look at the 53-man roster. Hope you guys like the detailed projection. I'm looking at some questions. I at least want to get this up to 49 minutes. It's a 49er show. You know, we're going to be on Isaac Guerendo number watch this cut down. When we get back out on that practice field, you can go to the rest of my articles up here in The Athletic, but this was coming out of Las Vegas. Isaac Guerendo faces a new question after his big return. Will he keep the number 49? Because he's going to make the roster. It's going to open up jersey numbers. So will Isaac Guerendo stick with that 49? Or will we go into the 20s because he called up Bobby Turner and asked for a number in the 20s much earlier before that? Yes, we've got over 1,100 people watching. How many subs do we have now? It's a really good question that I just asked myself. So I'm going to check it out. Going to my page. We have 75,900 something subs. So I think that's a good number. I think we're almost at 76 based on that. If I go to my studio page, I could see exactly where we're at. 75,911. You guys would get extra credit if 89 of you hit that sub button right now. We got the 76K on the show. Be a huge, huge period of growth there. So thank you, everybody, for the growth. Thank you, everybody, for the large crowd that we have right now. And this is just the show before the roster cut down. Tomorrow's going to be the busy day. I've given you guys my projection. I've told you who might fit on the practice squad. I'm actually going to come out with a firm practice squad list on the spreadsheet tonight. And then we'll see how close my actual prediction is. But it's just, I mean, it's like a March Madness bracket. You're never going to be 100% right. A lot of this stuff, it's hard to know how they're going to do some of the injury maneuvers. I guarantee you the 49ers will use both injury IR maneuvers to preserve roster space at their disposal. One of them is new. One of them is you could designate 2 guys to return, even though you put them on injured reserve right at the cut down. So they can use that on Feliciano. They can use that on Ambry Thomas. They can use it on who else? They've got one more guy that would be a good candidate for that. I've got to open up my roster and see here. You could use that on Feliciano. You could use it on Thomas. You could use it on Kalia Davis. And then there's another mechanism that involves more of a wink-wink deal. You can waive or release. You can release a healthy player who's not exposed to waivers with the predetermined wink-wink deal with that player saying, hey, we're going to sign you back to the active roster in a day or 2. Don't sign with anybody else. Hold tight. And all we have to do is carry an injured player on the 53, and then we're going to put them on injured reserve. And then as soon as they're on injured reserve and they're not taking up a roster spot, we'll bring you back. So in that way, the 49ers can find a way to keep more of these guys in the building that you see right here. It takes 2 fewer wink-wink deals with the new IR rule that they can use this year. But they still may have to use some wink-wink deals because on first sight, they've got 3 players who are going to be out for at least half the season. Kalia Davis, Ambry Thomas, and I always forget the third one here. Who is the third one? I have him listed down here. John Feliciano. Kalia Davis, Ambry Thomas, and John Feliciano. So I'm really excited to see how the 49ers are able to make everything work tomorrow. All right, 52 minutes. Sounds good. Everybody, thanks for watching. That's been your final 53-man projection. And you can rewind and watch at the top to see Steve Young's very candid thoughts on Brandon Aiyuk and on Trent Williams.